the ranking member, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the time. Ms. Cleland Hammond, I understand you're a lawyer, and I appreciated your comments about following the law. I think that's very important. Chairwoman DeGette and I talk about that on a fairly regular basis, coming from a legal background. But I have to say, under the Obama administration, I believe the EPA exceeded its statutory authority to justify several regulations, such as regulating emissions from truck trailers that don't have engines, claiming authority under the section of the Clean Air Act that deals with self-propelled motor vehicles. All the while they're going so far down that way to try to accomplish what they wanted that some, and I note some in the EPA, or in some in the administration, ignored warnings of high lead levels in drinking water from an EPA water scientist out in the field in Flint, Michigan. So I think we need to make sure that we're following the law and not following our wishes, whether it be a Republican administration or a Democrat administration. And I know that you would agree with me, and I'd give you a chance to answer, but I'm running out of time, and I've got to get to Dr. Deskins. Dr. Deskins, it's so good to have you with us today. Obviously, we share a lot in the region that I come from and the region you come from. Originally having grown up in Honeacre, and if you were here, we would have talked ahead of time. I've got a great Honeacre story. Call me sometime, I'll tell you about it. But in your experience with the coal industry and in coal communities, are communities opposed to working out creative solutions to improve the environment that also allow for robust economic activity and affordable energy?
First and foremost, I'm always happy to get a question from a fellow Emory and Henry alumnus.
There you go.
But no, I don't think coal communities are opposed to this. But I mean, people just have to understand these coal communities, are faced with many challenges. Many of these areas are very remote, very rural. The terrain's very rugged. They face tremendous challenges around human capital, around education, training, health, drug abuse. And they're not opposed to working out alternative solutions, but in many cases, they need help from places like the federal government to help enable these changes to happen. And they don't need just cursory help; they need real significant help because their challenges are significant.
Things like the Coalfields Expressway, which would open up parts of West Virginia, southern West Virginia, and southwest Virginia, and connect a bunch of our interstates together. That would be very helpful. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no, infrastructure is one of the key areas in which help is needed. Absolutely.
Because everybody says we've got to reinvent the economy, but when you have mountains and you don't have a lot of flat land and you don't have good roads, it's very difficult to do. I know you would agree with that. I want you to explain the coal severance, or the coal and natural gas severance tax, because that provides millions of dollars for things like education. And I'm not sure everybody on the committee understands that. And you mentioned it in your testimony. Could you elaborate a little bit and explain how that works?
Well, I mean, West Virginia, and I'm sure similar states across the country that rely on energy, have been, levying a severance tax on coal and natural gas and other items that are extracted from the ground for decades. I mean, in West Virginia, we have been heavily reliant on severance tax revenues for a long, long time. This funds state government in part, and it does fund a lot of local government activity in our state. And, when severance tax revenue falls, it has a real impact on local communities. As I mentioned, when severance tax revenue falls, it presents a challenge for our public schools, for example, because they have less revenue to fund the services that we need.
Yeah, and that's a real problem in southwestern Virginia as well as West Virginia. And in fact, many people are surprised, as we talk about social justice and economic justice, that the district I represent, while not heavy in minorities, is 422nd in household income based on the latest data that we have available out of 435 congressional districts. That doesn't surprise you a bit, does it?
Oh, no. Of course not. I mean, I can go on all day about the poverty that exists in Central Appalachia even today. It's not as bad as it was in the 60s when the Johnson administration was working, but there's still tremendous poverty. In West Virginia, as I said, we had some counties in southern West Virginia that have been in a Great Depression because of just economic devastation. And there's a lot of poverty there. And my mission is to plead to try to find ways to get it addressed.
And so if we're talking about economic, environmental, and social justice, we need to make sure we don't leave out the communities of Central Appalachia as we go forward. You would not disagree with that either, would you?
There's nothing in the world that I could agree with more. I mean, I completely agree with that.
Well, last but not least, I think we've touched on a lot of it, and you and I could go on forever, but I will mentioned what a great opportunity I had to go to Emory and Henry. You obviously feel the same way. And it's a great little school that makes a difference in a lot of lives and ends up with professors talking to congressmen in the halls of Congress. And it's a great thing from Southwestern Virginia. Thank you much, and I yield back.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman DeGette. I wanted to start with Governor Whitman, if I could. In your testimony, you state that environmental protection and economic prosperity go hand in hand, and you further stated, and I quote, that safeguarding our environment also pays economic dividends through the advancement of technology and the creation of jobs. I know that